The air smells like burning cedar and copper. Dust chokes the narrow streets of Jerusalem, catching in the throats of people running for their lives. They are laughing at the destruction. These are the people of Edom, and they are not strangers. They are family. When you live above the suffering of the world, you stop seeing the suffering as real. The Edomites think their altitude makes them divine. They think their isolation makes them immune. They watch the temple of Yahweh burn and feel absolutely nothing. This is not a geographical security strategy. It is the architecture of arrogance. But Obadiah delivers a terrifying law of biblical justice. The rock cannot hide them from the sky. The elevation that makes them feel like gods is exactly what will shatter them when they fall. And the violence they cheered for in Jerusalem is already walking up their own mountain path. But it is not wearing Babylonian armor. You do not live in a fortress of red limestone. You probably do not stand on canyon ridges watching physical empires burn to the ground. You do not collect tolls from ancient spice caravans crossing the desert. But the disease of Edom did not die in the ancient world. You carry the exact same architectural instinct inside your own chest. When life becomes chaotic, when the people around you begin to collapse under the weight of their own personal Babylons, your natural human reflex is to seek elevation. You build your own clefts in the rock. You insulate yourself behind the thick walls of financial security, emotional detachment, and the curated distance of modern life. You retreat to the high ground. Most people assume that the prophets of the Old Testament reserve their absolute harshest judgments for the massive pagan empires that crushed Israel, Assyria, Babylon, Rome, and from that high ground, you stand Amad Min Neged. You stand opposite. You watch the suffering unfold. You observe it through the sterile, blue glow of a glass screen while sitting in the quiet, climate-controlled comfort of your living room. You see a friend's marriage fracturing. You watch a sibling drowning under the cold, suffocating weight of addiction or debt. You hear the frantic, exhausted tone in a coworker's voice as their life falls apart. And instead of stepping into the chaos, you fold your arms. You feel the heavy silence of the room, and you rationalize your distance. You convince yourself that their collapse is the result of their own poor choices. Just as Edom believed Israel deserved the Babylonian sword, you tell yourself that maintaining your own peace is the most responsible thing you can do. You guard your time. You protect your energy. And you watch them bleed on the Jericho road from a safe, manageable altitude. But the book of Obadiah shatters that illusion with a terrifying reality. Passivity is not a neutral posture. It is an active betrayal. When your brother is bleeding in the dirt, refusing to reach out, your hand is treated by God as the exact same moral failure. As swinging the sword yourself, the divine courtroom does not just prosecute the Babylonian who lights the match, and they do carry massive weight. But if you look closer, at the absolute darkest, most traumatic moment in Israel's ancient history, it prosecutes the Edomite who watches the fire and refuses to carry a single bucket of water. The sin of Edom is the belief that you can safely detach yourself from the pain of the human family. It is the arrogance of looking at someone else's ruin, feeling the solid ground beneath your own feet, and whispering in the dark, "At least it is not me. At least I am untouchable." But Obadiah warns that this safety is a phantom. The rock you are hiding inside cannot hold. The elevation you think is protecting you is actually marking you for a much harder fall. Because God has a very specific pattern for dealing with people who refuse to step down from the cliff. And when his justice finally reached the red rocks of Seir, it did not arrive with the blast of trumpets or the march of a foreign king. It arrived through the exact same mechanism Edom had used on Israel. Look at the banquet halls of Selah. Look at the feasts carved into the red rock. Edom sits with their confederates. They break warm bread with their trusted allies. They drink dark wine imported from the coastal plains. They laugh at the memory of Jerusalem burning. They recount the gold they stripped from the terrified Judean refugees. They feel entirely secure. They trust the men at their table. God dispatches a prophet named Obadiah. He gives him a vision so brief, it fits onto a single scrap of parchment, Then, the table turns. The men of peace set an ambush in the dark. The trusted allies draw cold swords. The Confederates push Edom to the borders. The trap springs shut. God warns them in verse 7. All your allies have driven you to your border. Those at peace with you have deceived you. They have prevailed against you. Those who eat your bread have set a trap beneath you. They are driven out of the rock. They scramble down the sheer limestone cliffs. They tear their hands on the jagged sandstone. They flee into the scorching open desert. They become the refugees. They bleed in the dirt. They look up at their own mountain. The heavy iron gates are closed. Their former allies stand on the high ridges. The allies look down at them. The allies do not reach out a hand. The allies stand Amod min neged. They watch them suffer. As you have done, it shall be done to you. Your deeds shall return on your own head. This is not a random shift in ancient geopolitics. It is the terrifying symmetry of divine justice. The Babylonians do not destroy Edom. The friends of Edom destroy Edom. The men who ate their bread take their home. Just 21 verses. The shortest book in the entire Old Testament. For centuries, readers have skipped right over it. A nomadic tribe from the desert sweeps in. They push the descendants of Esau out of the fortress forever. They take over the red rocks. They erase the kingdom. Edom becomes a wandering people. They lose their high ground. They lose their wealth. History slowly swallows them whole. By the time Jesus walks the earth, the Edomites are a fractured remnant called the Idumeans. An Idumean puppet king named Herod sits on a Roman throne. He builds fortresses in the desert. He orders the slaughter of infants in Bethlehem. He tries to kill the true king of Israel. He fails. He dies rotting from the inside out. And shortly after, the Idumean name vanishes from the earth. Entirely. Permanently. The cliff is empty. The red rock is silent. The bloodline is wiped from the historical record. But the tiny scroll of Obadiah does not end with the silence of the mountain. When the prophet finishes delivering the doom of Esau, he shifts his gaze back to the smoking, devastated ruins of Jerusalem, and he delivers a promise that defies all physical reality on the ground. In the ancient Near East, the rules of conquest were absolute and unforgiving. When a foreign army shattered your walls, slaughtered your priests, and burned the cedar roof of your temple until the ash blew through the empty streets, your national story was officially over. It is tucked away in the minor prophets. Easy to miss if you turn the page too fast. Your God had been defeated. Your people would be assimilated into the empire, losing their language, their identity, and their name. By every measurable metric of human history, Israel should have vanished in the Babylonian dirt. Edom, on the other hand, held the geographical advantage. They had the wealth of the spice routes, the sheer limestone walls of Mount Seir, and the physical safety of elevation. If you were an observer standing in 586 BC, looking at the cold bronze chains binding the Judean refugees and the comfortable stone terraces of the Edomites, you would put all your confidence in the sons of Esau. But the survival of a nation is not determined by the thickness of its rock. It is determined by the covenant of its God. In verse 17, Obadiah pivots away from the doom of the mountain and delivers a shocking prophecy over the ashes of the valley. But in Mount Zion there shall be those who escape, and it shall be holy, and the house of Jacob shall possess their own possessions. This is the great reversal of biblical history. The Edomites are dragged out of their impenetrable fortress and erased from the human timeline, leaving nothing behind but empty caves whistling with desert wind. But the Israelites, broken, exiled, and humiliated, are miraculously preserved. 70 years later, they walk back across the desert. They drag heavy limestone blocks. It reads like an obscure ancient political rant against a nation of rock dwellers that no longer exists. Back into place, they smell the damp earth of a new foundation. Mount Zion lives again. Obadiah concludes his tiny scroll with a sweeping, cosmic declaration that echoes across the centuries. Savior shall go up to Mount Zion to rule Mount Seir, and the kingdom shall be the Lord's. The brother who chose the flesh loses his home, the brother who carried the promise, returns from the grave. The fire in Jerusalem was not an execution. It was a pruning. God allowed the Babylonians to burn the temple, but he never released his grip on the bloodline of Jacob. The 21 verses of Obadiah stand as a permanent monument to a divine reality. The empires of the earth will rise and fall. The fortresses of human pride will crumble into sand. But the kingdom of Yahweh will outlast them all. But this brief, violent prophecy is not just an ancient history lesson about two mountains in the Middle East. It is a mirror. And when you finally look into it, it demands an answer to a question you have been avoiding. Two boys wrestle in a desert tent, and a fracture begins that will split a family in half. A hunter trades his birthright for a red bowl of stew, and a kingdom builds its identity on the hunger of the flesh. But Obadiah is not an ancient political rant. It is the diagnosis of a human disease. The great tragedy of 586 BC was not just that. An empire burns the temple of Yahweh to the ground, and a brother stands on the cliff to watch the smoke rise. The refugees flee down the cold mountain passes, and the family who should have saved them hands them to the sword. A proud nation carves a fortress into the highest stars and discovers that elevation cannot stop divine justice. The untouchable allies spring a trap in the dark, and the men of the Red Rock are swept into the dust of history. A shattered people walk out of the Babylonian ashes, and the promise of God rebuilds the house of Jacob. Same blood. Two mountains, one surviving kingdom. But maybe the part that stays with me most is the geography of the cliff. The conscious decision to walk to the edge. Look down at a burning city and fold your arms. Not the violence of the Babylonians, the terrifying silence of the brother who stood amad min neged visible. Present, but completely detached from the pain of his own blood. If you are in a season where it feels safer to stay on the high ground, if you are watching someone you love fracture, under the weight of their own life, their own exile, or their own bad decisions, and you are tempted to just stand by, the walls of Jerusalem fell. It is that a brother stood on the cliff and watched it happen. To feel the weight of this tiny book and watch from a safe distance. Step off the cliff. The rock of detachment is a fortress that will eventually trap you. The kingdom of God does not watch from the ridges. It walks into the ashes. It gets its hands dirty. It reaches into the rubble to pull the broken out. And may the God, who never once stood aloof from your deepest pain, give you the courage to climb down into the valley for someone else and bring you both out, carrying something you could not have found in the safety of the heights. And to understand why a 2-1 verse scroll about a forgotten nation exposes something hiding inside of you right now. You cannot start at the burning of Jerusalem. It is 586 BC. The Babylonian siege engines have shattered the limestone walls. And the Temple of Solomon, the center of the Jewish universe, is folding. You have to go back more than 1,000 years before the fire. You have to go back to the womb. Rebecca arches her back, in pain. The tent is hot, smelling of damp wool and desert dust. Inside her womb, two boys are crushing against each other, kicking, wrestling in the dark before they can even breathe. The conflict is so violent she thinks she is dying. God speaks to her. Two nations are in your womb. This is where the shortest book in the Bible actually begins. Most people flip right past Obadiah. It is exactly 291 words in the original Hebrew. You can read it aloud in under 3 minutes. It has no famous lion's dens. It has no giant fish. It has no fiery furnaces. It reads like an obscure, angry poem directed at a nation of rock dwellers that history has completely erased. But this tiny scroll is not a historical footnote. It is a magnifying glass. It focuses the heat of God's justice onto a single, devastating reality: the rivalry of Esau and Jacob, Edom and Israel. From that suffocating tent in Genesis, the Bible tracks this bloodline like a slow-moving train wreck, in on itself, in a roar of flame and collapsing timber. But look away from the burning city. Look up. Jacob exploits a moment of hunger. Esau trades his birthright. Jacob steals a father's blessing. Esau vows a violent murder. Jacob flees. Esau hunts. They eventually hug in the desert decades later. The text says they wept on each other's necks. But the fracture in the bloodline never actually heals. It just metastasizes. Jacob's descendants become Israel. Esau's descendants become Edom. Israel settles the fertile valleys. Edom claims the harsh mountains. Israel builds a temple of gold and cedar. Edom builds fortresses in the rock. Israel follows Yahweh. Edom worships the dirt and the sword. Whenever Israel is weak, Edom raids. Whenever Israel is strong, Edom waits. Edom is not just a neighboring kingdom with a border dispute. It is the shadow of Israel. It is the brother who chose the flesh over the promise. Look at the name itself. In Hebrew, Esau is called Edom, which literally translates to red. He is born covered in red hair. He sells his birthright for a bowl of red lentil stew. His descendants settle in the blood-red sandstone cliffs of Mount Seir, south of the Dead Sea. The entire identity of this nation is built on the physical, the immediate, the hunger of the stomach, and the color of the earth. Up on the rocky ridges and the red dirt cliffs overlooking the eastern escape routes, men are standing in the fading light. For 1,000 years, they are the thorn in Israel's side. When Moses leads the Israelites through the desert, he sends a desperate message to the king of Edom, explicitly calling him brother and asking for safe passage. Edom responds by marching out an army. When King David expands his empire centuries later, he crushes Edom under his boot and garrisons troops in their cities. Blood is spilled. Generations pass. The hatred calcifies into something permanent. And then the Babylonian war machine arrives. The walls of Jerusalem come down. The temple burns. The people are slaughtered in the streets. But the detail that changes everything in Obadiah is not what Babylon does. It is what Edom refuses to do. The fire reaches the cedar roof of the Holy of Holies. The gold melts into the cracks of the stone floor. Babylonian soldiers strip the priests, bind the royal family in bronze chains, and begin the brutal, systematic slaughter of a conquered city. This is the day of Jacob's distress, the darkest day in the history of the chosen people. And less than 50 miles away, on the jagged red cliffs of Seir, the descendants of Esau are watching the smoke rise. They are not Babylonian soldiers. They are not wearing the armor of Nebuchadnezzar's empire. They are not swinging swords. They are just watching. They do not send water. They do not send weapons. They do not send help. They send raiding parties. Obadiah's vision freezes on this exact moment. He looks up at the cliffs, looks at the Edomites cheering as Jerusalem burns, and he drops a single, agonizing word onto the page: brother. In verse 10, God speaks through the prophet with a voice heavy with cosmic grief. For the violence done to your brother Jacob, shame shall cover you, and you shall be cut off forever. Your brother, they shared the same womb. They shared the same grandfather who walked the hills of Canaan under the stars. They shared the same flesh. When the Babylonian siege engines rolled up to the walls, Edom could have remembered the bloodline. They could have opened the mountain passes for the refugees. They could have offered sanctuary in the caves of the red rocks. But the womb was forgotten. The ancient grudge of the red stew won. The Babylonians were doing what empires do. They conquered. They crushed. They expanded their borders by force. But Edom was doing something far more insidious. This was not a military strategy. This was a family execution. As the Judeans flee down the Jericho road, scrambling into the cold desert night, the Edomites wait at the crossroads. When Judean refugees scramble up the rocks, bleeding, breathless, carrying whatever terrified children they could pull from the rubble, the text says they stand at the forks in the road to cut down the fugitives. They strip the survivors of their last remaining possessions. They hand the bleeding remnants of Israel over to the Babylonian generals. And they do it with a smile. Obadiah captures this betrayal with a rhythmic, pounding condemnation. He uses the phrase, "in the day of 10 times," in just 4 verses. In the day of his misfortune, in the day of his ruin, in the day of his distress. The repetition is like a hammer striking an anvil. The tragedy of the exile is not just that God allowed the temple to fall. It is that the family of Abraham tore itself apart, while the pagans lit the match. But there is a specific Hebrew phrase Obadiah uses in verse 11 to describe Edom's ultimate sin on that day. And when you look at the roots of this phrase, it changes how you read every conflict in your own life. Look closely at the grammar of Obadiah chapter 1. Verse 11. God is indicting Edom for their role in the destruction of Jerusalem, and he exposes the absolute core of their treason, using a very specific spatial phrase. Most English Bibles translate it something like this: "On the day you stood aloof, while strangers carried off his wealth, you were like one of them. The men on the ridges do not reach down a hand. They step into the narrow passes. They block the roads." The phrase translated as "stood aloof" is the Hebrew amad min neged. The verb amad simply means to stand, to take a position, to remain stationed. But the preposition min neged is where the conviction lies. Neged means front, sight, or presence. Min neged means to stand opposite, to position yourself directly in front of an event, in full view of the suffering, while remaining completely detached from it. It implies visibility without proximity. It is the act of seeing without intervening. It is the exact same phrase used in Psalm 38. When a diseased, broken David cries out in his suffering, "My friends and companions stand aloof, min neged, from my plague, and my nearest kin stand far off." In the ancient Near East, the primary social safety net was not the state. It was the kin. If you were attacked, your brother fought. If you went into debt, your brother paid. To stand min neged while your brother was being dragged away in bronze chains was a violation of the most fundamental law of human existence. That spatial detail changes everything. Edom was not passively unaware of the invasion. They did not just happen to be absent. They walked to the edge of the cliff, looked down at the smoke. I heard the screams echoing up the canyon, and consciously decided to take a front row seat to the slaughter. They capture the exhausted escapees, bind their wrists, and hand them right back down to the Babylonian death squads. Amad min neged is not a description of physical location. It is the geography of the heart. Treason is not just the violent swing of a Babylonian sword. It is the cold, folded arms of a brother who refuses to step in. If feeling the weight of these ancient Hebrew words is shifting how you read the text, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe, because every week we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. So, God issues a decree against the spectators. The Edomites were convinced they could stand min neged forever because they believed they were physically untouchable. They looked at their elevation, ran their hands along the sheer red cliff walls that protected their cities, and laughed at the chaos of the empires clashing in the valleys below. But the detail that makes Obadiah's warning so terrifying is what was actually hiding inside those rocks. Look at the jagged peaks of Mount Seir. The rock is the color of dried blood. The canyons are so narrow, the sun barely touches the limestone floor. Wind howls through the stone corridors, carrying the scent of dry dust and iron. Sand bites at the skin. This is Selah, the capital of Edom. It is a fortress carved directly into the living rock. The Edomites do not build freestanding walls. They do not need them. They live inside the mountain itself. And if you listen closely over the roar of the burning city, you can hear them cheering. They carve grand halls into the sheer cliffs. They chisel staircases into vertical drops. They hoard rainwater in hidden, sealed cisterns. They sleep safely behind impenetrable gorges. They watch eagles fly below their feet. They look down on the marching empires of the earth. They trade in copper. They accumulate massive wealth. They control the ancient king's highway. Caravans carrying frankincense and myrrh pay them heavy tolls just to pass through the desert. They are rich. They are comfortable. They are completely insulated from consequence. No ancient army can take this city by force. Babylonian chariots cannot climb these stairs. Assyrian siege ramps cannot reach these gates. Roman legions will later struggle to breach these exact same passes. The Edomites know this. They feel completely untouchable. They sit on their stone terraces. They drink their wine. They ask a rhetorical question in the dark, mocking the vulnerability of the world below. Who will bring me down to the ground? God hears the whisper in the rock. He answers through the prophet Obadiah. He speaks directly to the core of their national identity. The pride of your heart has deceived you. You who live in the clefts of the rock. Though you soar aloft like the eagle, though your nest is set among the stars. From there I will bring you down. Elevation creates a fatal illusion. Altitude breeds an intoxicating arrogance.